the young adult horrors like Cinderella locked up in the attic, and then we've got like the evil stepsisters down below making up the YA thriller category. Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. Today, as the title suggests, I'm going to be looking at my 2021 reading stats and using said stats to inform my 2022 reading goals. I got back into reading this year and I read a lot. 75 books to be exact. Now, 3 of those books were for school and only for school. The reason I am mentioning those 3 required readings now is that for books that I read for school and felt like I would not have read them otherwise, I do not give those books ratings, therefore I'm not really going to mention them again for the rest of the video, and they're going to be excluded from pretty much all the remaining stats to come. So I read 75 books total, 72 for pleasure, although not all of them were pleasurable, I'll say that right now. And just to sort of get you relatively familiarized with the books that I read this year, I'm going to go ahead and lay out where all of the books that I read this year fell in terms of star rating. So first off, let's look at the 1-star club. As you can see, I don't give out 1-star ratings very often. To make it into the 1-star club, a book has to make me angry to some degree. Within the 1-star club, there is usually very little to sometimes nothing that I liked about the book. This club consists of 6 books, which, when broken into genres, include 1 YA contemporary, 1 YA thriller, 1 literary horror, and 2 literary thrillers. It was not a good year for literary thrillers. Next up, let's look at the 2-star club. When I give a book 2 stars, it usually means that I didn't like it that much. There are several books in here that absolutely bombed the execution portion of the challenge that is being a book, and their solid concept is the only thing keeping them from being a 1-star. There's also just several books that just fell flat on their face along the way, or books that kind of devolved into something that I was no longer happy with. Now, this 2-star club consists of 12 books, 1 historical fiction, 1 historical fiction fantasy hybrid, 1 YA fantasy, 2 YA thrillers, 2 just thrillers, 2 YA magical realism books, one of which is just heavily leaning contemporary, but based on the marketing it really wanted that magical realism label, so we will give it to them even though I don't think it's that accurate, and there were 3 horror novels as well. Next up, we have our 3-star club. For me to give a book 3 stars, one of 2 things could happen. 1, I could just think the book was okay. It may not have done anything majorly wrong, but I probably just wasn't that engaged, or just it wasn't really for me. That said, there are also some 3-star books that did a lot of things right and had a lot of elements that I really enjoyed, but there were an equal amount of negative elements, objective or subjective, that kept me from giving it a 4-star or higher rating. This club consists of 21 books, 1 YA sci-fi, 1 YA horror, 1 romance, 1 suspense, 1 drama, because I refuse to call Malibu Rising historical fiction. It is not. I don't care what category Goodreads put it in for the Goodreads Choice Awards. Moving on, 2 literary thrillers, 3 just thrillers, 3 just literary, 3 middle grade, and 5 horror. And then we have our largest category, the 4-star club. A 4-star book is a book that I thought was really good. I'm not somebody that does half ratings, but if I were to do half ratings, I would say that any book that would get a 4-star from me, I really liked. Any book that would get a 4.5, I loved. There are certainly books in this category that I can say I loved, but they didn't have that 5-star feel. This 4-star club consists of 28 books, 1 literary thriller, though I will say in the 4-star range this category gets kind of iffy because I have realized that all of my favorite thrillers tend to have a slight literary edge, so you could argue that there's more than one in here, but I ultimately decided to only categorize 1 as being a literary thriller. Then we've got 1 YA thriller, 1 YA sci-fi, 1 mystery, 1 suspense, 1 gothic lit, 1 nonfiction, 1 horror biography? Jury's still out on that one. 2 horror, 3 literary, 2 historical fiction, 2 contemporary, 3 YA horror, 4 YA contemporary, and 4 thrillers. Last but not least, we have the creme de la creme. We have our 5-star club. As you can see, I am incredibly selective when it comes to 5-star ratings. A 5-star book basically just has to be my perfect book. So let's go ahead and look at what we've got here. We've got 4 books, one of which is a literary sci-fi. We've got 1 horror, 1 thriller, and 1 YA historical fiction. Now, obviously every booktuber's yearly stats video looks different depending on what stats they're interested in sharing. Most of mine this year are going to be to do with genre. Because this is the first year in a long time that I've done a lot of reading, I'm still very much figuring out what I like within different genres, if some genres are for me, if they're not for me, that sort of thing. So most of my stats do have to do with that, but I thought I'd quickly go ahead and insert the page number stat. I'm not a math person, and I did get 2 different results while doing this, but I think that the second result is right. If it's not, it's not. What can I say? Across the 72 different books that I read on my own accord this year, the number of pages that I read was 22,623. That's a lot of pages. Before making this stat, I was fully aware that really long books are just not for me, so I wasn't surprised when I calculated the average page count of each book that I read and came up with the number 318. That makes perfect sense to me. I am not a big book type of gal. And now getting back into the genre stats, I wanted to go ahead and see if I could figure out what my ideal genre was based on the ratings that I was giving out. So what I did was I went through all of the different genres that I read this year. If I read 3 or more books that fit into the genre, I calculated the average rating of said genre. Obviously, there are a couple of one and dones in there. I only read 1 Gothic Lit, I only read 1 nonfiction. Even though I gave both 4 stars, it's just not really fair for me to say that I love nonfiction or I love Gothic Lit based only on that. There were 9 different genres that included at least 3 books and therefore were worthy of me generating an average rating for them. And I'm going to go ahead in ascending order. So we're starting with the genre that had the lowest average rating from me. We did have a tie between 2 genres, so there are technically only 8 spots. So starting in the 8th place, we have, and this is no surprise to anyone, the YA thriller genre. This genre includes 4 different books making up roughly 5% of the 72 books read this year. And listen, I already knew YA thrillers was gonna be the lowest on the list. I cannot really say why I keep picking YA thrillers up. I'm just always hoping that one will exceed my expectations. And granted, there was a single 4-star young adult thriller, but it could not save the genre from an average rating of 2.25. Coming up in 7th place is the lovely genre of literary thriller. I read 5 books in this genre this year, which means it accounted for roughly 6% of my yearly reading and earned an average rating of 2.4. Putting these averages into perspective, if you're on Goodreads and you see that a book has a 2.4 average rating, you're probably not picking up that book. Moving up the ladder to the number 6 position, we have the lovely middle grade. I only read 3 middle grade books this year, which means it only accounted for 4% of my reading. Unfortunately, all of these books landed in the middle of the road for me, each one of them receiving 3 stars, meaning that it had an average rating of 3. This wasn't necessarily a shock because I knew I was just kind of feeling meh about every middle grade that I picked up this year, but it was disappointing to see it end this way because the whole year I had really been hoping to pick up a 5-star middle grade. Because when I think a middle grade book is done well, it can take a spot in the 5-star club, no contest. But this year I just did not find that perfect middle grade match for me. Moving up the ladder to position number 5, we have the horror genre. I read 11 horror novels this year, meaning that 15% of my reading, if of course the horror authors were doing a good job, was scary. The horror genre unfortunately was pretty hit or miss with a 3.09 average rating, but moving 1 spot up the ladder, we've got the thriller genre in the number 4 position. I also read 11 thrillers this year, so if we combine the thriller and horror genre, we're looking at 30% of my reading. The thriller genre came up with a 3.18 average rating this year. Not fantastic, but let's be real, expectations for thrillers can vary quite a bit. Moving into our top 3/4, we have YA contemporary in the 3rd position, which was kind of a shocker to me, not gonna lie. I've kind of been writing off YA contemporary all year as something that's just not really for me anymore. I think due to the fact that one of the first YA contemporaries I read was a 1-star, but the 5 YA contemporary books that I did read made up for 6% of my yearly reading, and the genre itself received an average of 3.40. In our number 2 spot, we have the literary genre, which just barely edged out our YA contemporary category. I read 6 literary books this year, which is 8% of my overall reading, and those literary books earned an average of 3.50. And now, the moment you've all been waiting for. What were my top 2 genres of the year? We'll go ahead and start with the genre that didn't surprise me. That genre being historical fiction. 5% of my reading this year was historical fiction, which means I read 4 historical fiction books. Now I did give 2 stars to one, that one book being The Kitchen Front, which did not enjoy that book at all. But I also handed out 2 4-star ratings to Wild Woman in the Blues and The Nature of Fragile Things. And then within the last couple of weeks of the year, I read Midnight at the Electric by Jodi Lee Anderson, gave it 5 stars, and it just shot historical fiction into the number 1 spot with a 3.75 average rating. And now moving into the surprise genre. Let's all give it up for young adult horror. I also read 4 of this genre, it also was 5%, and it also had a 3.75 average rating. If you had asked me before I started making these stats if I had read any young adult horror books this year, I would have said I don't think I did. While I am aware that young adult horror is a genre that exists, it feels so niche to me that I don't even really have expectations for it or thoughts on it. When it comes to the YA thriller genre, I have all kinds of expectations, all kinds of opinions. I have been let down by so many YA thrillers. But looking at the 2 different genres, it almost feels like the young adult horror is like Cinderella locked up in the attic, and then we've got like the evil stepsisters down below making up the YA thriller category. And it turns out I might like Cinderella. I guess that is kind of the point of Cinderella, is that people like her, but anyway, one of the reasons why YA horror had the amount of books that it did was that the only series that I ventured into this year did happen to be in that category. Now, it only makes up half of the category, so I'm not just like automatically excluding it. But this year I read The Dark Descent of Elizabeth Frankenstein, really enjoyed that book a lot. I also read The Year of the Witching, also really had a good time. I read The Madman's Daughter, an unpopular opinion, but I thought it was a fantastic time. So fantastic, in fact, that I picked up the sequel, which I gave 3 stars and didn't really like that much. But the fact still stands. Against all odds, I like YA horror. So what does this all mean for 2022? This year I would like to read 75 books again, but what I want to do this year is have a good mix of reading books that I'm pretty confident I will enjoy, and reading books that maybe challenge some of my perceptions of the genres that I rated low. So this year I have a goal of reading 6 historical fiction novels. I've said in past videos before, I think that historical fiction is a very safe genre for me. I tend to have fairly positive opinions towards historical fiction novels, and I just want to keep the good vibes going. Now, because I'm trying to up how many historical fiction books I read, logic says I should do the same thing for YA horror. I'm just concerned that there's not enough YA horror in the world that I would be interested in to be able to get it to 6. So I have said I want to read 5 YA horror this year. I think that reading 5 different books is going to be enough to really kind of guide my course when it comes to this uncharted land that is YA horror. If anybody has any young adult horror recommendations, please let me know of them. Inform me. As you can see, I liked The Dark Descent of Elizabeth Frankenstein, I liked The Year of the Witching, and I liked The Madman's Daughter. Take from that what you will. It seems like the common thread there is like troubled young women. Next, I want to read 6 literary novels this year. Me enjoying the literary genre didn't surprise me that much. It is a genre that I'm still actually relatively new to, and I'm definitely intrigued to see what some of the nominees for some of the literature prizes out there are this year, because I would love to pick them up. Now, I'm still not fully convinced that YA contemporary is for me. I'm still kind of scoffing at the idea that I do enjoy YA contemporary, which is odd because back in the day, yes, I loved YA contemporary. I'm gonna try and read 5 YA contemporaries this year. Now let's go ahead and move into some genres that I'm interested in prodding a bit and just kind of double checking. As I said earlier, I have been hunting for a 5-star middle grade because I do think that that is a good genre for me. I think that well-written middle grade, I usually adore it. A lot of my absolute favorite books are middle grade, and I didn't necessarily read them when I was the age I was supposed to be reading them. So this year I want to try and read 4 middle grade. I want to keep the search going. I don't want to abandon it. I am going to find a 5-star middle grade this year. I'm gonna do it. And now I may regret this next decision, but I like the idea of a literary thriller. Obviously I enjoy thrillers for the twists and the turns and all of the fun stuff and some of the cheap stuff too. But I want my thrillers to have some meat to them. I want to think. I want some thrillers that lean more into like the psychological side of things. I want what the literary thriller genre is offering me. What I don't like is pretentiousness. And unfortunately, this genre seems to be wrought with it. So I very well might be signing myself up for some really pretentious reads down the line by doing this, but I want to read 6 literary thrillers. It might be hard to find that many that I'm interested in, I'll be real, but I want to do it. I really want to test out this genre and make sure that it is for me, or really that it's not for me, because I don't want it to be not for me. I want it to be for me. And finally, I'm going to discuss 2 other things, one a genre and one not necessarily a genre. I don't know if I have said it out loud in any of the videos, but for the past year I have had the conviction that I do like romance. What am I basing this off of? I don't know. I read 1 romance this year, literally only 1. Said Romance I gave 3 stars. I was really enjoying it for the first half, and then the second half I kind of felt like it fell apart and I was really disappointed. I need to find out if I like romance at all. I keep saying that I do, and yet I never read it. So I am forcing myself to read 3 romances, and I know that doesn't seem like much, but listen, I only read 1 this year and I had 12 months to pick up a romance book. I need to be able to definitively say whether my heart is cold and black on the inside or if I actually enjoy reading about romance. Because right now I've just been saying it, honestly, mostly out of solidarity for the people that like it, because let's be real, romance readers get a lot of flack, and for what reason? For why? For why? I like the idea of me sitting down with a nice little romance novel and having a good time, but at this point it's still just an idea. I need to explore. And finally, this is not a genre, but I would like to try and read more translated fiction this year. I know that I read at least 2 translated books this year. I think I probably read more. Should we find out? Okay, this year I read 4 translated works. Almost read 5, but I DNF'd 1. I really want to make an effort to read more. I'm not going to give myself a set number for this one just because it's one of those things where it's like, if the book's available in English, it's available in English. I don't know any other languages, but I definitely think I've got a good amount on my TBR, so I will be able to kind of boost the amount of translated fiction that I read this year. And there we have it. I'm going to go ahead and write up a little goal sheet for myself so I can be marking off every time that I read from a genre that is on my list. Obviously, I just skipped right over like the horror and the thriller, and if you're concerned, I will be reading plenty of horror and plenty of thrillers. I don't have a problem with that. Something about those genres, no matter how many bad books I pick up in either genre, I'm still going to want to read more, because if you've got ghosts and cold case files, like, that's all I really want in life. So like, we're good. I don't need to test those genres. They can pretty much do whatever they want to me and I will keep picking them up. And on that note, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you again soon with another video.